It was Christmas Eve and the world was engulfed in festive cheer. Cities glowed with colorful lights, shoppers rushed home with arms full of gifts, and children eagerly awaited the arrival of Santa Claus. But high above, an ominous fleet of alien ships approached Earth, preparing to shatter the peace and forever change the course of human history. At NORAD headquarters in Colorado, Air Force Captain Samantha Adams scrutinized the mysterious radar signals. The blips had appeared suddenly and were unlike anything she had ever seen. As the objects drew closer, a chill ran down her spine. She immediately phoned her superior, General William Mathis. "Sir, you need to see this," Adams said urgently. "We have multiple unidentified craft entering Earth's atmosphere." Mathis rushed to the command center and studied the screens grimly. "How many and where are they heading?" "At least 50 ships, sir. Their trajectory indicates they'll be over major cities within hours: New York, London, Moscow, Shanghai." "What are your orders?" The general hesitated, grappling with the magnitude of the crisis. "Scramble all fighters. Put the military on high alert worldwide. But keep this quiet. We don't want to cause panic on Christmas Eve." As word spread through secure channels, U.S. President Olivia Davenport was pulled from a White House Christmas dinner. Her face drained of color as National Security Advisor Jack Simmons briefed her on the situation. "What do we know? Are they hostile?" she asked, her mind reeling. "No communication yet, Madam President," Simmons replied. "But the ships are heavily armed and their approach seems aggressive." President Davenport steeled herself. She had faced many crises, but never one of this scale. "Assemble all top military brass and world leaders for an emergency summit. We need to coordinate a global response quickly." Within minutes, U.S. fighters were airborne, speeding toward the alien ships with orders to intercept them before they reached the cities. In the lead F-22 Raptor, Major Caleb Anderson scanned the skies ahead. The alien craft were sleek, metallic, and far larger than anything he had trained against. As Anderson watched, hatch doors opened on the underside of the ships. Swarms of smaller attack craft poured out, racing straight toward the human fighters. He barely had time to shout a warning before the battle erupted. Brilliant green plasma blasts lit the sky, melting through the human fighters' fuselages like butter. The pilots didn't stand a chance against the alien superior technology and numbers. Anderson watched in horror as his wingmen were vaporized one after another. Dodging and weaving desperately, Anderson managed to take out several attack ships with missiles. Then his Raptor shuddered as an energy blast struck its tail. Alarms blared and smoke poured into the cockpit. He was going down fast. As the alien ships streaked past toward the glowing cities below, Anderson wrenched the ejection handle. The canopy blew off and his seat rocketed into the night sky. Parachuting down, he watched the anarchy unfolding in the distance. Massive beam weapons lanced down from the alien ships, slicing through skyscrapers and iconic landmarks. Fires raged out of control and terrified screams filled the air. The great cities, only moments ago beacons of holiday joy, had transformed into apocalyptic war zones. In New York, Times Square was in chaos, the giant Christmas tree toppled like a matchstick. Londoners dashed madly from an explosions-riddled Oxford circus. The Kremlin and Red Square lay in smoldering ruins. Shanghai's Bund was a fiery hell along the Huangpu River. Destruction and death were everywhere. Anderson hit the ground hard, shedding his parachute as he unholstered his pistol. All around him, alien attack ships were landing, disgorging streams of bipedal armored creatures. They were taller than humans, with thick chitinous hides, glittering compound eyes and vicious claws. As the aliens opened fire indiscriminately on fleeing civilians, Anderson knew the horrible truth. This was no probe or scouting mission. This was a full-scale invasion. Earth was under attack and the terrifying battle for humanity's future had begun. In the months leading up to the invasion, astronomers had noticed unusual activity in the skies but could never have imagined this outcome. An alien fleet had arrived, with technology far surpassing humanity's, and begun a devastating assault on Earth's major cities during the holiday season. The aliens showed no mercy, killing indiscriminately. As the horrific news spread, people worldwide abandoned their Christmas celebrations and rushed for safety. Highways clogged with desperate refugees fleeing burning cities. Many didn't make it far before being obliterated by the aliens' terrifying weapons. President Davenport and other world leaders watched the destruction unfold via secure video links, their faces ashen. Despite the best efforts of Earth's militaries, the alien attackers could not be stopped. Human weapons seemed nearly useless against their advanced ships and armor. "We need more information," President Davenport said urgently. "What do these aliens want? Can we negotiate?" "All attempts at communication have been met with more attacks," General Mathis reported grimly. "Their intentions are clear: total annihilation of humanity." In the ruins of Shanghai, Mei Ling stumbled through the rubble-strewn streets. An hour ago the 8-year-old had been decorating a Christmas tree with her family. Then the aliens came, slaughtering her parents and older brother. Mei had escaped carrying only her infant sister and was desperately searching for safety. A menacing hum filled the air as an alien troop transport descended from the smoky sky. Mei shrank back into the shadows of a collapsed building. She watched in terror as 24 armored alien soldiers disembarked and began stalking the streets, weapons ready. If they discovered her, she knew she and her sister would be killed instantly. Suddenly, gunshots rang out and several aliens fell, greenish ichor spurting from their shattered exoskeletons. Resistance fighters had ambushed the alien patrol. As a ferocious battle erupted, Mei remembered her father's words, "No matter what, never give up hope." Summoning all her courage, Mei dashed from cover to cover, alien blasts chewing up the ground at her heels. At last she reached a half-collapsed apartment block other survivors had taken refuge in. A teenage boy ushered her inside. There, amidst the makeshift bunker of frightened and wounded, Mei found a spark of hope, people helping each other in the darkest of times. In London, the once bustling streets lay eerily silent except for the crackling of flames and haunting screams of the dying. But in the underground tube tunnels, the resistance was gathering. Former curator of the British Museum, now rebel leader, Dr. Elizabeth Albright rallied the survivors. "The government has fallen, but we are still here," Albright said fiercely. "These tube tunnels are our fortress now. We will fight for every inch of our city." Soldiers, police officers and citizens alike took up arms, rifles, pistols, Molotovs, even antique swords from the museum. They would not go quietly into the night. Meanwhile, at a remote NORAD bunker buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, military analysts pored over every scrap of data on the alien invaders. They had gleaned little, except that the enemy was called the Krell and seemed to be a hive mind species, communicating instantly across vast distances. If they had a weakness, it had yet to be found. Major Anderson, miraculously alive after being shot down, joined the NORAD team. As a first-hand witness to the alien savagery and technology, he brought valuable insights. "We need a new strategy," Anderson argued. "We can't beat them head-on. But we might be able to outthink them, find a vulnerability. We have to keep fighting on our own terms." Just then, an alarm blared. Satellites had picked up new waves of alien ships descending on Earth's last bastions, including the NORAD base itself. The Krell had determined this was the heart of the human resistance. There was no time to evacuate. NORAD stone-faced defenders strapped on weapons and helmets, preparing for a last stand. The ground quaked as alien boring machines chewed through rock, drawing inexorably closer. The most desperate hour had arrived, and time was running out for humanity. Only a miracle could save them now. In Moscow, a ragtag band of survivors had taken shelter in the cavernous metro tunnels beneath the shattered city. Their unlikely leader was Ivan Petrov, a grizzled 62-year-old plumber who had lost his entire family to the aliens. We need food, medicine, weapons, Ivan growled to a scavenging team preparing to venture out into the blasted ruins above. But no heroics. Stay unseen. Avoid the Krell at all costs. Among the scavengers was Natasha Sokolova, a whip-smart 17-year-old who had been separated from her parents when the Krell attacked. Desperate to find out if they were still alive, Natasha frequently took dangerous risks to search for them. As the scavengers crept through the grey rubble and ice of the ravaged city, constant Krell patrols kept them on edge. They had to melt snow for drinking water and scour ruins for meager scraps of food. Suddenly, Natasha held up a hand and motioned for the others to take cover. A Krell patrol was approaching. But rather than hide, Natasha pulled out a homemade slingshot and a bag of small explosive charges. Before the others could stop her, she darted out and loosed several charges at the aliens. They exploded, shredding 2 of the Krell instantly. More Krell poured out of a transport, giving chase on long insectoid legs. Natasha sprinted through the frozen streets, dodging plasma blasts. She knew these alleys well and led the Krell on a merry chase. Just as it looked like she would be cut off, Natasha reached a manhole and dove for safety, straight into the powerful arms of Ivan Petrov. The old plumber had been right behind her, watching her back. He glared disapprovingly, but Natasha just grinned, then pulled a stolen Krell plasma carbine from beneath her coat. Ivan shook his head but couldn't help smiling. The girl had spirit. Far across the ruined world, in Tokyo, field reporter Kenji Nakamura picked his way through the mountains of rubble that had been the glittering Shinjuku district. Only luck and a well-stocked bunker in his office building had allowed him to survive this long. Kenji moved from one shattered storefront to the next, searching for supplies. Food was scarce and clean water even more so. Most of Tokyo's survivors had already succumbed to starvation, exposure, or Krell death squads. As he hunted for anything of use, Kenji's old reporter instincts kicked in. He still carried his video camera and began documenting the destruction around him, providing narration in an urgent whisper. "The Krell are determined to exterminate humanity," he said grimly. "And they are very close to succeeding. But we cannot let them win. We must fight, however we can." Suddenly, Kenji heard a noise behind him. He spun, raising a pistol, but lowered it quickly. A small group of survivors stood there, 2 men, a woman, and 3 children. "Please, help us," the woman pleaded. She held out a hand and beckoned to Kenji. "Come with us. There are others nearby, hiding. We look out for each other." Kenji hesitated. He had been on his own for so long. But the survivors' faces were filled with such desperation and hope. He knew what he had to do. "Yes, I will come," he said. "We will fight the Krell together." At NORAD, the command team watched the screens in horror as the Krell bore into the granite heart of the mountain. The alien invaders would reach the command center within minutes. General Mathis barked orders, deploying security teams in a last-ditch effort to slow the enemy. But it was futile. The Krell's energy weapons made short work of the reinforced bulkheads. In the command center, Major Anderson and the others waited grimly, weapons trained on the door. The sound of fighting drew closer, then abruptly fell silent. A second later, the door exploded inward. Anderson opened fire along with the others, their bullets sparking harmlessly off the Krell's exoskeletons. Then the alien weapons flashed and defenders fell left and right, hideously burned. Anderson kept firing, yelling, even as the end closed in. "We fought to the last," he thought. "We did all we could. I'm sorry." A plasma blast took him in the chest. As the world faded away and the Krell closed in, Anderson wondered if it had all been for nothing. Then he slipped into darkness, NORAD fell silent, and one of humanity's last hopes guttered out. With NORAD destroyed and its leadership lost, the Krell moved swiftly to crush the last pockets of human resistance worldwide. Alien troop transports descended on every city, disgorging endless hordes of the merciless insectoid warriors. In the London tube tunnels, Dr. Albright and the remnants of her rebel cell fought like demons, inflicting heavy casualties on the Krell. But the aliens just kept coming, heedless of their losses. The tunnels ran red with human and insectoid blood alike. One by one, the defenders fell until only Dr. Albright remained, a sword in one hand and a pistol in the other, screaming defiance. The Krell's annihilation of Earth's major population centers was as swift as it was brutal. The great cities, New York, London, Moscow, Shanghai, and countless others, fell in mere days, sending tens of millions to their graves. But not all was lost. In smaller towns in the countryside, bands of survivors came together, scrounging food, weapons and gear in a desperate bid to keep the fight alive. Bit by bit, they learned the invaders' weaknesses, the gaps in the joints of their exoskeletons, their somewhat clumsy maneuvers in Earth's gravity, their inability to see the full color spectrum. Former school teacher Grace Levinson became the leader of one such group in rural Colorado. Along with a handful of local cops, farmers and a NORAD comms officer who had escaped the base's destruction, Grace staged daring guerrilla raids on Krell supply convoys. "They're tough bastards but they ain't invincible," she told her people, her eyes hard as flint. "Their tech breaks down like anything else. We just gotta be smart, be patient, and make every bullet, every booby trap count." The raids were met with brutal reprisals from the Krell. Whole towns were laid waste, their populations massacred. The few survivors fled into the mountains, forced to live on the run like wild animals. As the war ground on, humanity's losses mounted. But so did the Krell's. The aliens had never faced such tenacious, unpredictable resistance. Though the cost was devastating, the human guerrillas were wearing them down. After months of non-stop fighting, the defenders of Earth began to gain ground. They retook small towns, then larger ones. In the ruins of the great cities, they established fortified enclaves, launching ever bolder attacks on the Krell. Hope, so long absent, began to rekindle. The Krell, it seemed, were not invincible. Humanity, bloodied but unbowed, rallied for the long fight ahead. But the Krell had one last, terrible weapon to unleash. A doomsday device, powered by a stolen fusion core, buried beneath the ice at the North Pole. If detonated, it would scour all life from the surface of Earth. In a desperate global offensive, the resistance threw everything they had at the Krell, fighting to distract them while a hand-picked team led by Major Anderson and Grace Levinson raced for the pole. The battle was fierce, and the casualties enormous, but finally the two NORAD warriors reached the buried device. As the Krell closed in all around, they armed the last satchel charges to destroy the alien weapon and save humanity. In the final moment, Anderson and Grace looked at each other, bruised, bleeding, but filled with grim purpose. They had both lost almost everything to this war. Now they would gladly give their own lives too. "For Earth," Grace said. "For the future." "For the fallen," Anderson replied. "And for each other." They pushed the detonator. A new sun bloomed at the top of the world. The shockwave flattened the Krell armies, shattered their remaining ships, and cracked the polar ice for 1,000 miles. When the global snow and ash clouds finally parted, the battered but unbroken survivors beheld a new world, one where humanity was bloodied but free, where the Krell menace was vanquished, and where the task of rebuilding could finally begin. The war was over. Against all odds, Earth had prevailed. And though the scars would linger for generations, so too would the stories of heroes like Anderson, Grace, and so many more. Heroes who had proven that courage, sacrifice, and the indomitable human spirit could triumph over even the darkest of foes. Humanity would recover, would rebuild, would thrive again. Because no threat, not even from the stars above, could ever truly conquer the hope and tenacity of the human heart. As the war ground on, humanity's losses mounted. But so did the Krell's. The aliens had never faced such tenacious, unpredictable resistance. Though the cost was devastating, the human guerrillas were wearing them down. After months of non-stop fighting, the defenders of Earth began to gain ground. They retook small towns, then larger ones. In the ruins of the great cities, they established fortified enclaves, launching ever bolder attacks on the Krell. Hope, so long absent, began to rekindle. The Krell, it seemed, were not invincible. Humanity, bloodied but unbowed, rallied for the long fight ahead. But the Krell had one last, terrible weapon to unleash. A doomsday device, powered by a stolen fusion core, buried beneath the ice at the North Pole. If detonated, it would scour all life from the surface of Earth. In a desperate global offensive, the Resistance threw everything they had at the Krell, fighting to distract them while a hand-picked team led by Major Anderson and Grace Levinson raced for the pole. The battle was fierce, and the casualties enormous, but finally the two NORAD warriors reached the buried device. As the Krell closed in all around, they armed the last satchel charges to destroy the alien weapon and save humanity. In the final moment, Anderson and Grace looked at each other, bruised, bleeding, but filled with grim purpose. They had both lost almost everything to this war. Now they would gladly give their own lives too. For Earth, Grace said. For the future. For the fallen, Anderson replied. And for each other. They pushed the detonator. A new sun bloomed at the top of the world. The shockwave flattened the Krell armies, shattered their remaining ships, and cracked the polar ice for 1,000 miles. When the global snow and ash clouds finally parted, the battered but unbroken survivors beheld a new world, one where humanity was bloodied but free, where the Krell menace was vanquished, and where the task of rebuilding could finally begin. The war was over. Against all odds, Earth had prevailed. And though the scars would linger for generations, so too would the stories of heroes like Anderson, Grace, and so many more. Heroes who had proven that courage, sacrifice, and the indomitable human spirit could triumph over even the darkest of foes. Humanity would recover, would rebuild, would thrive again. Because no threat, not even from the stars above, could ever truly conquer the hope and tenacity of the human heart.